Hi everyone, welcome. My name's Byrne. I'm here today with Lawrence Harvey and we'll be talking about the Immersive Sonic Journeys project. Before we dive in, I'd like to acknowledge country. We're here today speaking on unceded land, land of the Byrne language group of the Eastern Kulin Nations, here at the Melbourne Recital Centre. Beautiful building and facility that allows us to extend traditions and practices of song and gathering that have happened on this land for a very long time, thousands and thousands of years. And of course, the Bunurong people, but also near the Yarra here as a place of gathering for the whole Kulin Nations and people beyond as well. I pay my respects to elders past and present. Immersive Sonic Journeys is quite an expansive project. I think we need to explain from the beginning. I have with me, as I mentioned, Lawrence Harvey, Associate Professor at RMIT, Director of Style Sound and co-convener with myself and Darren Verhagen of the Design and Sonic Practice Research Group. Welcome, Lawrence.
Thanks, Ben.
For being here. Thanks for the project. My first question is an obvious one. What's the project? Tell us about it.
Okay. The project started off after an approach from Melbourne Recital Centre to establish a partnership between the centre and RMIT. So we have a range of people involved in both sound and music, which often things a bit like doing country and western these days. So, but we, although we're not a conservatorium, we still have people with music degrees and we're teaching music in different ways and it's spanning out into sound as well. So as part of that partnership, we did a number of site visits down to the centre, and it was at that point where we were walking around with, I think, Jesse Upton and Latoya as well, and started to become very aware of the acoustics of the overall building, not just of the concert hall. So with any concert hall, you're looking to, and performance facility in a city, but particularly Melbourne, you're looking to isolate it from the soundscape, but also vibration. So what you end up with in the performance areas is like a building within a building. And they're both the salon and the main performance area. In addition to that, then what you're also looking to do is to reduce noise in the building. So the building has a very low noise floor, so not a lot of ambient sound, even less now that that's just been turned off, thank you. And it means that actually sound travels really well around the building, and this is what we started to notice when we were doing the walks through this foyer that we're sitting in and the one upstairs. But then also the blue stairwell, which only gets used if you're using door number 4, I think. Yep, going into there. It's extraordinary space. You go up about 7 levels in quite a short space of time, which gives you all these different listening positions. So from there, we were interested in how could an experience be created around the building before you went into the room, before you went into the actual performance rooms.
Wonderful. It sounds terrific in here, I have to say, the resulting commissions. It strikes me that there's really 2 key areas of practice being brought together, and that's electroacoustic composition broadly, if I try and pull what's quite a diverse set of works together, but then also this design process of how you use sound to activate a space to lead people through space. Have you found that it's been challenging bringing those things together? I imagine it has in some ways, but also there are opportunities.
Yes,
yeah,
it's the short answer. Yeah, and it is a multi-stage process. It's not every sound or not every composition is going to work spatially, and particularly in a space like this one. So, in the first instance, it was ended up being a parallel process where we were commissioning works and then briefing the artist at the same time, maybe a little bit behind, where we had come into the centre. We had done one workshop by that point, and we're starting to decide on speaker locations around the building. What I tried to avoid was having to put in lots of speakers. We wanted the smallest number of speakers that we could get away with, and still have a good quality of sound moving through the spaces. Particularly so you had the sense of it's not necessarily coming from a location, but you get a sense of it coming from an area of the building, or in fact kind of coming from the whole building at the same time. So I've also found that in some of the other exhibitions we've done in more traditional spaces. We do end up spending a lot of time deciding on speaker locations relative to what the listening locations will be, because these aren't events or projects where it's really obvious, and that in this case where the audience is static. So you do need to think about what are the opportunities or the affordances you're providing to an audience to move around and listen.
Could you perhaps describe a bit more for people maybe that are here with us today and haven't been upstairs yet, and for people listening online who maybe didn't get the chance to hear the works? You mentioned the stairwell at the back, and then there's the speaker array at the front of the building as well, through the stairs and around the glass facade. But can you describe in a bit more detail the setup, sure, the speakers, but particularly the scenario, I guess, what it is in the space, what it is that people encounter when they come in and hear the works?
So after taking an initial walk during the workshops and then thinking about what might an audience experience, it's really providing an opportunity for listening while walking. So whereas you go into the Elizabeth Murdoch main hall or the salon, you're seated with a very particular relationship, still quite visual, that there's something happening in front of you, and of course there's reflections off the sides, or you might have a spatial sound system in there as well. But it's quite a static experience, and then that's very different here, because you're moving through the sound, you're moving through the building and moving through the sound field and moving through the composition all at the same time. So as you're doing that, and the works have been mapped in and in some cases panned around, or if they've got layers, we've moved the layers of the work to different locations in the building as well. So that depending on where you are, that will also create a different auditory perspective. So one of the terms that we've ended up shorthands we used as we were doing the project is what we call the vista. So where you sort of get to a point where you feel like, well, if I'm here, I've got sound coming from this direction, I might be looking out, it feels like a stopping point. And then as we developed up the speaker system, we put it in so that these vistas would be supported, if you like, or that's where they are. So particularly as you're going up the front stairs here and pointing some of the speakers up so they reflect off the ceiling as well on the first level. And so again, the idea being that you can traverse through the composition, and it's hopefully not got dips and gaps in it, that it's almost like you're, I think I'd describe it as like a sort of an acoustic thread through the building. So that was part of doing that one. And then also working with the composers as well to think about how that experience might be either episodic or could be continuous as well. So we had discussions with them, with the commission pieces, the 4 commission works, on how they might think about the timing structure of what they were doing when you're not working in a concert situation.
Yeah, of course, people, as you say, walking around, moving through the works differently, but also entering the works, leaving the works at different points, coming in and out of earshot. That's something I very much noticed coming down as the works are realised, having visited and had some input throughout the way that they actually led me into different parts of the building, to the back towards the stairwell there, which you wouldn't necessarily know was there, as well as, of course, up. And that was the other thing I really wanted to ask a bit further about, is, as we've both spoken to, verticality is a huge part of this, yeah, which is not always so common with spatial sound systems and diffusion. Is that something you mentioned about the diffusion in the space and the speaker placement? Is that something that you found required a particular approach or a lot of focus working with the artists involved in terms of how to work with that and working with the affordances of the space, but also the brief, as I understand it, in terms of activating the space and pulling people upstairs to explore the rest of the building?
Yeah, the verticality is unusual in that way, because you've got this big void space with the window looking back over to the NGV. And one thing we found in the workshops, as soon as we put speakers on the top level, which I think we initially did just to keep them out of the foyer. I think that was why we did it. That we knew we could work up there and we weren't going to be disturbed. So as soon as we did that, of course, you found, and the way that the sound reflects off the spaces, and again because of the low noise floor, sound travelled through the whole building from the top down. So it was a great attribute immediately of doing that. What we did do was to put the JBL, when you're upstairs, they're called curved speakers because they are curved. And we pointed them so one of their speakers is going to the window and another one is coming back onto the wall. They're not just pointing directly at someone, and that's a case that we did with the other ones. We used the reflective qualities of the walls, etc., to help move the sound around the spaces. So the other thing I remember we commented in the workshop, because we had the sound sources up high, was something you don't often do, it influenced you to look up. Because you're hearing that, you think, oh, what's coming from above me? And that's a somewhat unusual experience around the places. I mean, I can think of a few places. I was talking to Helen earlier about the soundscape system over in when it was in Federation Square. That was quite high, and you had a similar thing there. It would get you to think about what was above you, or at least look up. So I think it can modulate how you move through a building, but how you experience a building as well.
Yes, of course. And that you mentioned Vista before, the multi-sensory experience potentially for people in terms of being led by sight, looking out and how they listen, but also being led by their listening through the building, and then looking out, also exploring the art collections here, the rest of the building. You mentioned to me in discussions around the project that you decided not to put subs in and emphasise bass. You did do some tests early. Can you talk about that decision as well?
So some of that was just practical. It was because of the way the balconies work, we would have had to have put the sub out in quite an exposed area, which meant you would have had a big black box sitting in a corridor, which wasn't going to be necessarily that attractive, and a bit more interventionist than it was. We also found a little bit that those frequencies would build up quite a lot. I think, looking at David, he's nodding, yeah, and Nicole, that very quickly, like a lot of the low frequencies would build up in the space, just because of the reverberation time, and you've got that unimpeded void space for sound to flow around. So if there was something more permanent in here, you probably could go a little bit bigger with the drivers just to help that particular bottom end, but we still found the experience immersive enough without it.
Yes, yeah, I'd agree, and that's, I mean, as a lover of bass frequencies, it seems like a very smart choice in the space. As you say, the physical properties of low frequency sound, the way it'll build up in particular places, potentially not really hit in one spot, but then be an issue, of course, with lots of different use going on in the space and so on. But also, again, with the diffusion you're talking about, with the use of the architecture, there's a lot else going on. Like, it sounds really good. It keeps it clean and clear, I guess. I
mean, I wouldn't say it was intentional, but probably more just of a personal bias that particularly when you're going around the city, and most buildings are full of a lot of low frequency already, and just from plant equipment and people not thinking about the air conditioning systems and things like that, possibly coupled to the building anyway, so it's going to be enhanced as well. So it's really interesting to come into a space where you don't have that low throbbing already. So in some ways I thought, it'd be good not to introduce too much more into it if we could help it.
Yeah, of course. It's a wonderfully diverse program as well, with the commissions as well as restaged previously. Commissions perhaps been remixed or recomposed to varying extents. I imagine the artists have taken very different inspirations, of course brought different practices to the work, then taken different inspirations from the affordances of the space, decisions about the speaker system and so on. Could you maybe give us a couple of examples of that? Perhaps, for example, starting with Jasmine Wing-Yin Leong's work and the stairwell.
Sure. I was in conversation with Jasmine yesterday, and she was talking about her. She plays an Urdu, I think she referred to it as a Chinese string instrument. So she's very attuned, if you like, to subtle frequency shifts, and so her piece is all based around the resonant frequencies of the space. So any space you go into will have points in the frequency spectrum where they will, the energy builds up much more strongly in that particular frequency. So when you're in the bathroom and you start singing, you think, I sound fantastic. You quite possibly have hit one of your resonant frequencies of that particular room. So Jasmine came down with our techs and did some analysis of the space and then used those frequencies as the basis for the composition. So when you're walking through the blue stairwell, and her piece is playing, if you put your hand on the wall or just rest your head against the wall, you can feel the vibrations on the building. So she's quite literally playing the building in that way. So she very much worked with the resonant qualities of that one. Jane was very drawn to the verticality of the grand staircase, this very big front staircase. And for her, the image of women's voices falling into water for that one. And so that for her was something that she was drawn to very, very quickly within that one, and sort of stuck that out for the couple of months that she was on the commission. And similarly for Charlotte as well. Charlotte was with her piece. She actually was the only person that decided to do a different piece for the blue stairwell compared to the front space. And the blue stairwell has its own natural reverberation, almost quite sort of cathedral-like, and I think too with the soaring ceiling in there. And so she went for a very gestural, granular piece on that side, but at the front, she was very drawn to the idea of the breadth of the space that she was sitting in. And so she's gone for textures that build up and overlay and kind of tumble over themselves, that you can then again experience as you walk up through the levels. You're walking up through those spectra. So not all of them had composed multi-channel works before or in installation, and that's what we covered in the workshops, is how they might approach that. So, and briefly that comes down to when you're working in a composition, say in a concert setting, you're really thinking about time and how the piece will unfold in the given duration of the commission. In this case, you're thinking about time and space and the motion of the listener. So you've got these added dimensions to it.
Yeah, of course. Which brings me to, what about you? There's one of your works in here as well, which I gather is made from material drawn from a couple of previous works.
That was a late edition. This had an issue with one of the other pieces and just we had to make that up. But it was also a piece that we used for one of the workshops, and it was a work from, I think I may have got the date wrong, I think it was actually 2002. And it was a big VR commission I had with a group then called Metroform in the VR Centre. And so it was an exploration of 6 chambers, big VR chambers. That, just over 20 years ago, you needed a whole silicon graphics supercomputer to run it all, but the audio was delivered independently, and so I composed 8-channel works for that piece. And that was a time-stretched gong, so it's a very deep gong, and it's got a filter, so it sort of starts, but then seems to sort of travel upwards. And when we did the workshops, it worked really well in the space. And it just happened that it combined with a more recent project, a dance piece with Sandy Parker that we put on a couple of weeks ago at Trades Hall. But again, this interest in bells and gongs, and that was part of the Federation handbells as well. So I like to think of it as an interlude between the other pieces.
Yeah, it's very beautiful. I remember you using it when you were first doing testing in the space last year. It has this kind of spectral fluidity that I think moves through. And I find it interesting the way you've taken some of that material, from a VR work and then into this kind of context. And it strikes me that it perhaps relates to what was like for Mary and Joe, who had works that we've previously commissioned for Black Box Space up at RMIT, represented here, and as should be the case, it had the chance to actually work on remixing, recomposing to do it. But on their behalf, can you maybe, as well as extending what you were saying about your own work, speak to that process of translation, if I call it that, because they work very, very well here, but it could, I imagine, be awkward. It doesn't seem obvious, when you're composing for a space. We've just been talking about all the affordances, all the things that are specific to presenting work this way, to bring things that have been linear temporal experiences, works that have been, to be experienced to varying extents in more linear fashion into this site responsive, site activating role. Could be quite challenging, but seems to work quite well.
Working electroacoustic music can be incredibly fluid about where you end up working in that way. The works are really portable in that one, and I think, even to give you an example from, I know you've also been involved in curatorial projects, you can, again, thinking back to even the late 90s, early 2000s, you'd be sweating on a tape arriving in time or a disc arriving in time from overseas. Now you can put an invitation out by 5 o'clock that afternoon. By the time you get up the next morning, you've got a Dropbox full of a concert. It's fantastic. Like, there they are, multi-channel works from around the world. You've got a concert. So that idea of then the pieces being able to, well, first of all, travel around the world quickly and easily, but then also to be remapped and reimagined into other spaces is something that I know you and I have spoken about, and also with Darren as part of the Design and Sonic Practice Group, that we begin to build up a repertoire, a body of work that we can spend time with over ideally a number of years and remount pieces in different contexts, in different ways, so that first of all for the artist, their work has a life beyond a single performance. But we're also seeing that as part of, if you like, the cultural fabric of a city, part of the listening culture of a city in that way, and then hopefully even part of an international network as well, that both local and international artists effectively trust us to put on their pieces. And then aiming for quality, then also have that experience for audiences as well, that it might have been a piece you've heard before, but you haven't heard it under those conditions and in those spaces. So ideally we will look for opportunities that go beyond just a traditional setup in that way, and thinking about how they can be reworked under different conditions, I think is a way of keeping the works alive, but also liveness in general.
Yes, yeah, of course, yeah. You make me think of a few things. I mean, I guess as I raised the opportunities that are there with that, particularly if you do the work and have the resourcing to continue the work with the artists and the conversation with them, so they have the chance to follow through on how their work is represented, what it becomes in these different situations. But also, as you talked about, with the relative ease we have in getting files around and things like that compared to dealing with tape and so on. Also that challenge that music is ubiquitous for many people now. Sonic work, even there's a lot of access to it more broadly. You know, that sits alongside the sonic demands of the city. You were talking about how much bass is around anyway. There's always a lot to hear. So what makes it special, what makes it beautiful, and that attention to actually presenting works in the best way possible. Also, you know, giving artists the chance to really compose for particular spaces. So like that black box space. And for people who don't know, this is a 24 channel surround system we have up at RMIT's city campus here in Melbourne. And here there's obviously other facilities we're regularly using and partners working in the capital and so on. But that to me speaks to the vitality of this work. Obviously there's long now and rich traditions of spatial and multi-channel composition, but particularly at a time where, you know, people often have earbuds in all the time, to have sound in space, to have sound presented in space that are in a way that is done with care, I guess, done with attention to detail. I mean, that's been a lot of this process. I imagine it's been over a year, this project, to realise these works, the initial testing, call for EOIs, commissions, curating in of extra work. I've had the opportunity, thanks to you, of having some input in that, through to then the workshops, the realisation. It's all the details, isn't it, that takes time?
Yeah, I think so, and that sense of crafting for the overall works in that way. And when we in the first version of Style Sound Studios in Building 9, we referred to the pod as a craft in that way, because it's a space where you come to make. But I also like the idea of craft as a vessel. We talk about in an ocean seagoing craft in that way. And so I quite like the idea of you create this ephemeral world that you can step into and you go somewhere in that way. And I think sound's fantastic for that, because you don't need to wear a very expensive bulky headset to do it. You can walk in, but it does, to get that right, does take a lot of time. And we, as part of the process, not just for this one, but whenever we're doing concerts or anything, we do a small setup in the studio with all the equipment we're going to use. We spend a lot of time doing the spatialisation and getting it ready. Everything we test in the studio, that gets packed and brought down. We don't swap anything out or anything like that. And we have been, since Nicole and David started in the studio 2 years ago, we've actually gone back and spending a lot of time on the sound of what we do, really thinking about, well, what is the quality we want to be able to put into the space?
How does it sound? Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I've been talking about how easy it is to do some of this. In some ways, yeah, it's too easy. Anyone can chuck up a pair of loudspeakers and put them on and put something on it and go, great, I've got a sound exhibition, and you walk and go, oh my God, it's so
easy to do, hard to do well.
Yeah, well, yeah.
That brings me to the experience of working with Melbourne Recital Centre. I've really noticed in the last few years the centre supporting a very diverse set of musics and sonic practices. I've really enjoyed how it's become a much more regular part of my life in the city, in the sonic life of the city. The partnership with Melbourne Electronic Sound Studio, MES, for example, and staging their sonorous commissions here, and now the work you're doing here. How's it been being part of this space, this ecology?
I know when we started and I met with Jess and Latoya, it sort of takes me back, because we were actually a part of Opus One when the centre opened in 2009, and we did 5 concerts then in both the main hall and the salon. So for us, it's been great coming back after quite a while. And yeah, I agree, being part of that, watching how the centre has really opened up to a really wide range of musical cultures and genres and communities, so that when you go across the program, I like to think of it as like this kaleidoscope that's constantly just shimmering in front of you, and so you think, oh well, that's a very different audience tonight than it was the night before. And so, I mean, I'm actually back here on Sunday for the Illusion concert, so...
yeah, I've just been looking at the program notes that are around about what's on over summer, going, oh, I've got to get tickets for that.
Yeah. And that, I mean, in the same way, we're opposite the NGV, and you've got these very, very substantial organisations devoted to visual culture. We have one devoted to, well, it's obviously more than one in Melbourne, but we have one centrally placed in the hub devoted to sonic culture and listening, which I think, is incredibly important.
Yeah, for sure. We should wrap up, I guess. So thank you. Before we do, I imagine maybe you have some thank yous too, to give you that opportunity, the last of the talks.
Absolutely. First of all, thank you to the centre for the opportunity. It's been fantastic. I'd also like to thank Nicole Halford and David Turner, our 2 technicians who've done a fantastic job on getting us here and getting installed. Thank you both. And then also to the artists as well for your work and dedication and diligence in seeing the process through and providing such fantastic work, and also to the audience for coming along.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. Thanks, Lawrence.
Thanks, man. Great, thank you.